Your A through Z, covering the LGBT, LMNOP, and everyone in between. We're so excited to be here at the Commonwealth Club. The program tapes here weekly, and lately, as we head into the holiday season, it kind of fluctuates between Wednesday, Thursday. So check the listings at commonwealthclub.org for future programs. But I'm really happy to be doing this program with my co-host, John Zipper, who's the Vice President of Media here at Commonwealth Club. And he also hosts his program, which is called the Week to Week Political Roundtable Talk. So I'm very, very happy to have a political nerd with us today. It's really going to be his show.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, we have a special guest, and I'm lucky and honored that he's here today, but I'm lucky to be able to call him a friend, and we have done some work together throughout our careers. But the last time I saw him, I sat in his office as he was terming out as Board of Supervisor for San Francisco, and I shed a tear. It was sad, but we knew that David would continue to be a force here in San Francisco. He's currently the chair of the San Francisco Democratic County Central Committee. Let's welcome David Campos to the program.
Thank you, Michelle. It's an honor to be here, and I had an opportunity to meet your wife, so congratulations.
Oh yeah, that's new. No baby yet, but yes, a wife, that's new, since we last spoke. So,
John, thank you for
Glad
having
to
me
have
as
you.
well.
we have a lot of important things to cover, and we're going to try to cover it in 1 hour, but we can't let you go without at least honoring the tradition here on the program of sharing a coming out story. So David, if you will.
You know, coming out for me was very challenging. I guess it's probably challenging for everyone. And I was actually in law school when I did it, and I did it by way of a letter to my parents. And, you know, the thing about coming out is that if you grew up in a family like mine, a Latino family, very religious, Catholic, you think that if you tell your parents, your family, that side about you, that you'll never have them in your life. And what I realize is that, you know, there's something to be said for family, and that as much as you think that your family is not going to be there, that's not the case. And in my case, my family has a closer relationship with me because I can be my authentic self. And but at the time, you thought the world would come to an end. And in fact, I think, you know, things got so much better.
So what were the responses? Did they write you a letter back and say, it's okay?
I think no. I mean, I think it's a process. And I think, you know, this is back in, 1997, 96. So it was a different time. But I think that the thing about coming out, which is what's so powerful about it, and as Harvey Milk used to say, is that it's a lot harder for you to demonize and to think of all the horrible things about gay people when you actually know someone who is gay. And I think that for my parents, they had a lot of stereotypical views of what it meant to be a member of the LGBT community, which once they saw who I was in my life, you know, it just sort of it clarified things. There's nothing like knowing someone who's gay.
So they knew you. Did that change then their views of homosexuality and homosexuality?
I think so, yes. Yeah. And, you know, they are as close to my husband as they are to any of their in-laws. So, you know, I think it's an amazing thing to see. Though at the time, like I said, I don't know that I thought that was possible.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Okay, so the election.
Yeah, right.
I think we start locally. I think we start with San Francisco.
Yes.
The results or the outcome of Board of Supervisors, for example, that is a huge win for, I think, you know, the Liberal Party, or the liberal of all of us in the Democratic Party. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, I'm very proud of the work that the San Francisco Democratic Party has done. In the audience, you have our executive director, Adam Mayes, who was an important part of all that work. And with respect to the local elections, what we tried to do was to support candidates and measures that we believe are who we are as San Francisco Democrats. Not only did we support those candidates and endorse them, but we actually went all out to work for them. And the party had the most robust program that I have seen since I've been in San Francisco. We had the typical slate card, but we had that in English, we had it in Spanish, we had it in Chinese. And then besides those 3 slate cards, we had 11 individual pieces that we mailed out. And I think that work really paid off, because what happened is that by the end of the election, you can see that every one of our endorsed candidates for supervisor won. And I think that happened for a lot of different reasons, and certainly each of them ran great campaigns. But I think that one of the things that happened is that the Democratic Party did push them forward. And I think that that's because there is a sense that the San Francisco Democratic Party is more relevant to people, and they trust that party. So I'm very proud of that. And what that has created is not only a more progressive majority, but it's in many respects a super majority that transcends ideology. There are people in that super majority that are not necessarily progressive per se, but they're people that we can work with, and who believe that San Francisco needs to take care of every San Franciscan. And I think that is a very important message in that election, not just the candidates that won, but we had a very important measure, Prop C, that was on the ballot. And Prop C was ultimately about that, this idea of, should the wealthiest city in the country turn its back on the homeless? And San Franciscans overwhelmingly said, no, we're not going to do that.
I really want to dive into Prop C in a lot of ways and break it down and kind of what this means for our city. But going back to Board of Supervisors, so District 2, Catherine Stefani, District 4, Gordon Marr, District 6, Matt Haney, which is huge, landslide. District 8, of course, Raphael Mandelman continued to be our supervisor for District 8, and then District 10, Shaman Walton. And when you think about these people, and you mentioned a super majority of progressives, my thoughts instantly go to, gosh, we just got out of a very contentious and grueling mayoral election here in San Francisco. We know the outcome of that, and we now have Mayor London Breed. How is the dynamic going to change, in your opinion? That some people have felt like, some of us in the progressive community really were disappointed in the outcome, but this being a big win for us, how is that going to change the dynamic?
Well, first of all, I think that every one of the candidates that won and that is already there wants to work with Mayor Breed. Many of us did not support her, but we want to work with her. We want her to be successful. And I can tell you that if you speak to every one of the candidates that we endorse, they will say that. But it's not just they who would say that. If you talk to Hillary Ronen, if you talk to Aaron Peskin and other people, they will say the same thing. I think that the message for Mayor Breed is that in terms of policy, the people that were elected are more aligned with where San Francisco is. And on the very important issue of homelessness, that alignment is clear, and she is not where San Franciscans are. And since this new majority is, I think it's an opportunity for her to work with that new majority. And I can tell you that that new majority will extend that olive branch, which I hope she takes. Because it's all in our interest for London Breed as mayor to be successful. But we also want to be clear that we want to have a relationship that is a respectful relationship, where it's a two-way street, where it's not just one way. That the board and this new supermajority has a role to play in the governance of this city. And so I am optimistic that we will get to that point. But Now that I think the olive branch has been extended, hopefully it's in her, the ball is in her court to take it.
It's interesting that we have this situation here in 2018 after this election because, of course, former San Francisco Mayor Gavin Newsom just became governor. When Gavin Newsom was mayor, he had a very contentious relationship with the Board of Supervisors. At one point, there was a referendum on that would have forced the mayor every so often to actually have to come and talk to the board. I mean, knowing what you know about London Breed, and it's a lot more than I know about her, but it's knowing what you know about her, what do you think she is likely to do different? Not what you hope she'll do different, but I mean, you know, knowing how she deals with people or her the way she networks and what she knows of the people on the board, what do you think she's likely to do with a board that is going to have some different priorities on confronting issues that, frankly, in the large scale, they're all on the same side. How to get there, obviously, there are some very serious differences.
You know, I really think that it would be a mistake for me to prejudge that because, you know, I have differences of opinion with London, but I also know that she's a very smart person. She's very capable, and I think she cares about the city. And I actually think that part of what happened with this election is that she received bad advice, and she followed that bad advice. Prop C is, quite frankly, to this day, I don't understand why she came out against it. Because what it does is it actually provided the mayor the funding needed to address a lot of the issues around homelessness that we're not able to address, and specifically the issue of housing and services. I can tell you as a supervisor, because I had the most encampments for a while in my district, and we cleared a lot of those encampments, but what happened is that we would clear them, send people to the navigation center, and then after 30 days, there was nowhere to go to send these people, and so they were back on the street. Prop C actually gives the city the funding to build that supportive housing so that you have a place to put people. That's what we're doing in Santa Clara. We have close to $1 billion in a bond where we're actually building supportive housing for these people so that they're not on the street. And so I still don't understand why a mayor would be against that, and to the extent that there are issues about the way the money is being spent, you're the mayor, you're the chief executive. You know, make it right. Make sure that the people that are working for you are doing what they're supposed to.
So she'll be in charge of actually determining how the money's spent, or will the board?
Well, that's the big question mark with Prop C, right? That the way that it works is that, yes, the mayor as the chief executive will be in charge.
Or
right?
will Mark Benioff be?
Well, and I think that the board has a very important role to play.
Yeah.
The thing about Mark Benioff, right, is I give Mark Benioff a lot of credit because, you know, we have been talking about corporate responsibility for a long time. But it's one thing for me as an elected, as a political person, to talk about corporate responsibility. It's another thing when someone from that world actually steps forward and says, you know what, we're making a lot of money. We're making a lot of money because we are in San Francisco and we have a responsibility as a corporation to give back. Yeah. And so I give him a lot of credit. Hopefully, you know, he'll finally do something about what's happening in the border and what Salesforce is doing on that. So he's not, you know, perfect, but a lot of credit on this issue. Yeah. But the challenge with Prop C is that there are forces that are trying to keep it from being enforced. And I really hope that the Board of Supervisors pushes forward so that the will of the voters is respected. And this bogus idea of a lawsuit, we're going to have to fight that.
And I've heard that this is the argument of it not having 2/3 of them. Mm-hmm. What does that actually mean in legal terms? Because when that came up, I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was even an issue.
Well, I think that there is a legal challenge, and I'm happy to see that the city attorney has made it very clear that he's going to vehemently defend the will of the voters. Quite frankly, what I hope happens, and what I would ask the mayor, is that she, as the chief executive, now that the voters have spoken, she should contact those individuals, if she has relationships with them, to say, drop your legal challenge. You know, because I think in the end we're going to win that legal challenge, but why spend the next few months fighting about that when we should be thinking about the most cost-effective and efficient way of actually using this money? So I hope she does that. And if she doesn't do that, then I think this creates an opportunity for the Board of Supervisors, this working supermajority, to step in and say, Madam Mayor, if you're not gonna, lead the charge to implement Prop C, we're gonna push it forward to make that happen. And it's not about politics. It really is about doing something for these, the most vulnerable people in our communities. But it's also respecting the will of the voters. San Franciscans have spoken. More than 60% said this is the way to go. And so one of the things that we don't do enough as elected officials is respect what voters have said. And in this case, the message is clear. I hope they heed that message.
Of course, a lot of voters also voted for Donald Trump, so, just saying. Sometimes voters
Well,
are
actually,
wrong.
millions more voted for
That's
Hillary
true.
Clinton, so.
Right, but, I didn't actually mean to get that into antagonistic, I'm just pointing out that sometimes voters will do something you don't want, and you kind of are hoping that there'll be, compromises or whatever. Clearly with the landslide victory of all 5 of the propositions that they passed,
Mhm.
there were 5 measures on the ballot locally. I was kind of curious, so this was a year, whether you call it a blue wave or not, technically it probably wasn't, but it certainly was a big upsurge in Democratic voting in many areas. In San Francisco and the Bay Area, it tends to have higher voting averages than others. How did we do compared to normally? And what I really want to get at is, if this hadn't been a, Trumpian blue wave sort of era, do you think any of these local races would have gone differently, or do you think those forces that drove those would have gone the same way anyway?
I think at some point there has to be some analysis of what the various factors, where I think that it was a confluence of things that came together. I think that what's happening at the national level certainly had a big effect. And I think I can tell you from some of the people in the audience and others that being out there working on these local campaigns, the fact that you had a Democratic Party, San Francisco Democratic Party slate card meant a lot for people, especially because of what was happening at the national level, I think. But I think that a lot of things were possible, and the way that I saw the role of the San Francisco Democratic Party was that it wasn't just that we have to impact what happened here locally, which we clearly did, right? The party endorsement meant, most of the time you were going to win. But we also had to impact what happened at the state level and at the national level. And at the state level, San Francisco's turnout was so high, and the level of engagement was so high, that I think that we actually tipped the outcome in favor of some really important candidates in very close races. Tony Thurmond right now is ahead by a few thousand votes. And he was going against a charter school bad candidate where a lot of money was spent against him. We actually had a specific mailer focusing on education, which meant that more people voted for him in San Francisco. I think that was important. The same thing with other races. I can tell you that they were relying on San Francisco to deliver a big turnout and a big vote for these candidates, because you cannot win statewide unless you win San Francisco by wide margins. And then the other thing that I would say, which is, to me, besides the local stuff, the most important thing we did, and arguably, and I actually think is the single most important thing that happened on Tuesday of Election Day, is that we won the House. In San Francisco, we opened Red to Blue SF with Nancy Pelosi, where we had San Francisco Democrats calling in these congressional seats. And a lot of the races that we focused on are races that we won and that we flipped. So we had a role to play in taking back the House of Representatives, which I think is the most important thing that we have to do against Trump.
So many exciting things to talk about in this election, but you got into the House, so let's talk or revel on that for a little bit. What do you expect of the new House majority and whoever's the speaker, though at the moment it looks like it'll be Nancy Pelosi again, but what do you expect they're going to do? There's a lot of the base saying impeachment. There's a lot of the more establishment wing saying, no, we're going to investigate. What do you think, what do you think they will do, or what do you think they should do? What's your view?
Well, look, I think that I speak as a progressive Democrat. You know, part of the reason that I got involved in Democratic Party politics is to move the party left. And one of the reasons that we ran a slate to take over the San Francisco Democratic Party is because we felt that the Democratic Party in San Francisco had become too corporate and dominated by those corporate interests. So we are pushing the party left. That said, I do think it's important to have unity. And one of the things that does bother me about what's happening, even though I don't agree with Nancy Pelosi on everything, there are things that I think she could be more progressive on. It does bother me, right, that we have this fight, even though she spearheaded this effort to take back the House, and was successful in so many ways, and we know that because we worked directly with her to make that happen. That there is now a question of whether or not she should be Speaker. I do think that the speakership is not something that she should do for too long, but I do think that given what she did and what she oversaw, that she deserves that. You have Chuck Schumer, who lost seats, who was just voted overwhelmingly, by acclamation to be the leader for the Senate. I do think that there is sexism involved. Yep. That when a woman does something like what she just did, that there isn't that level of recognition, and you have these 5, white men who are trying to oust her. So I hope she prevails, because I think it's the right thing to do. And when she prevails, I think that those of us on the left will have an opportunity to push so that the Democratic Party holds Trump accountable and actually pushes for the issues that are important to working people and stands up for basic rights. And one of the things that I am particularly concerned about as a formerly undocumented immigrant is what's happening around immigration. I think that what's happening with immigration is a tragedy, and it goes against who we are as a country, and we need to push back on what Donald Trump is doing, where he's demonizing immigrants, and it's ultimately driven by racism and white supremacy. And I think that we have to be the party that supports our history, our tradition as a country of immigrants.
I want to add, just a couple of points to this discussion in terms of even some of our Democratic leaders moving or swinging more left. I mean, let's mention Dianne Feinstein, who has stood up for Prop C, and that was a little bit of a shock. And at the same time, even recognizing her political courage and experience when we saw her come out, fighting with nails and, claws during the Kavanaugh hearings. And if you saw from the backside, you saw that this person really understood politics in some ways. I would just love to hear your thoughts on kind of when we lost the president, or when Hillary Clinton lost. I think the Democratic Party went through an identity crisis, if you will. We were leading up to that, adding Bernie Sanders as a socialist, as a Democratic ticket.
Mm-hmm.
So just speak to maybe like in this past 2 years how we have evolved. I kind of feel like we're starting to see where our strengths are, where we can learn, and we're kind of starting to move into meeting each other in the middle.
Well, look, I think that the Democratic Party is at a crossroads. We're trying to figure out who we are as a party. And one of the reasons that I believe we lost the presidential race and why we have lost, in the past, is because we have moved away from the core principles that make you a Democrat. Because so many Democrats, so many corporate Democrats started to look like Republicans. And when people have a choice between a Republican and a Republican wannabe, my sense is that they're going to choose the Republican because they'd rather have the real thing. And so those of us on the progressive side of the Democratic Party have fought against those corporate interests, not because we're against corporations, but because we don't believe that corporations should dictate policy or govern the agenda of the party. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a fan of Dianne Feinstein, and I'm glad that she moved left, but I think that part of what happened with that race, it was a push against the establishment. And I'll be honest with you, I think that there is a machine, a political establishment in San Francisco and California that runs San Francisco politics, that runs state politics. And it's a very wealthy establishment that is connected to big money. And those of us who are involved in Democratic parties want to reform, in the Democratic Party, we want to reform that. We want to bring the party back to the people. And I think that it's an opportunity to do that. And what we have seen is that if you change your message and are unapologetic about who you are, and if you in turn focus that message on working people, on women, on communities of color, and especially activate those communities of color, you can win, right? And I think what happened before is that people thought that the way to winning was to water down who we were, to try to appeal to a middle that never really voted for us in the end. And I think that we are going back to who we are, to the core of what makes us Democrats. And what we have found in this election is that, you know what, that is actually a winning strategy. And that's why I think it's a really exciting time. And it's a time for us to come together and be smart. Because as much as I want to make a stand and take a principle, when it comes to Donald Trump, first and foremost, I want to win. We have to win. We have to get him out of the White House, because if we fail to do that, we will be in trouble. Look at how much damage he's already done in 2 years, right?
Look at how much damage he's done, in the last 6 days.
Yes, exactly, right? So we cannot afford, which is why I think that as much as there are divides internally, we have to, first and foremost, be united as a party. Party unity is really important, because that's what it's going to take to defeat this guy and everything else that comes with him.
This isn't really necessarily what you deal with at the DCCC, but if you're Russia and you wanted to hurt the Democrats, what would you be doing right now?
Well, I mean, I think they have a winning strategy, quite frankly, because they got their guy in the White House, and the way that the President of the United States talked about this foreign government, it's like he worked for them, and his allegiance is to that foreign government, right? And I think that there is a lot of division, and I'll tell you that it's at every level. One of the things that I'm working on down south in Santa Clara is that we're working on the census, okay? And the Trump administration is doing everything possible to make sure that there isn't a complete count in the census, and that people who look like me are left out of that count, right? And that is so important, because the census will determine funding and also political representation for the next 10 years. And what we know will happen is that there's going to be a lot of misinformation about how the census works to scare people from being involved. I mean, they did that already during the election. Scare tactics, in Texas and other parts of the country. They had eyes, on alert, and I mean, there was so much fear. And you know what? Even though their tactic has worked for a while, it's not working anymore. I was reading that Latino turnout was up by 175%. So there's something going on in this country. We just have to keep going and keep it up and be relentless.
I want to go back to immigration. I think that this is a very important topic. It feels very chaotic, and we're in crisis mode right now. Even if we can't get him impeached, and if we have to go through the next 2 years before a new president takes office, we hope more lives will be destroyed, more lives will be taken, people will be deported. We're going to be, in my opinion, in a public health crisis in a lot of ways if they start getting their ways with the public charge regulations being changed, or everything else, being an anti-immigrant attitude from the administration. Your thoughts, your feelings. California is a sanctuary city. With Gavin Newsom as governor, more than likely will continue pushing for better policies around the immigrant community. But obviously, this is a nationwide issue.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's an issue that I've been dealing with for a long time, and it's a personal issue for me. And in fact, where Gavin Newsom and I had differences was over immigration. and we since, have kind of patched things up, and I think that he recognized some of the mistakes he's made. I did go to